In this video, it will be your goal to be able to solve linear equations that contain two of the same variable. So in the equation you see below, you see a couple of different issues that we haven't approached before. First, you see that x appears twice. So you can see that there's an x hidden in here, and there's an x outside of the parentheses here. The other piece is that one x is in parentheses and one's not. So that makes things a little bit more complicated. Hopefully, your first gut instinct as you would look at this problem is telling you that you should distribute, knowing that in order to even start this problem, you want to get rid of the parentheses. And that's exactly where we are going to start. So we're going to start here by distributing out that -7. So we have -7x plus -21, then plus 2x, and here I'm going to use keep change change. So I have plus -4 is all equal to -60. So hopefully that was your first gut instinct, is that you decided to distribute. Then, hopefully you're noticing that if you look on the left-hand side of the equation, you see a couple of things that are similar that could be combined together. The first are the terms that contain an x. So here I see a -7x and a plus 2x. Those are on the same side of the equation, and as a result, those two values can be combined just like we did when we learned about like terms. So the -7x and the 2x can be combined together to have -5x on the left-hand side of the equation. Then from here, if you also look, what you'll notice are that the other two terms are also alike. Here we have a -21 and a -4. And those can be combined together because they are alike terms since they do not have a variable part, and they can be combined together to be -25. So essentially what we've done here is we used the distributive property to get rid of the parentheses, and then we combined in any like terms that we saw. Then from here, this starts to look just like our multi-step and two-step equations. We can see we have -5x plus -25 is equal to -60. So here we're going to undo the order of operations. So we know that if we were to look at x on the left-hand side, we would multiply by -5 and then add a -25. So here we're going to undo these in reverse. We're going to start by undoing that addition of a -25 by adding 25 to each side. So these become 0 together. We're left with -5x is equal to a -35. And then we're going to undo that multiplication of -5 by dividing both sides by -5. And here we have x is equal to 7. So it started off looking as a pretty complicated problem. We were able to make it much simpler and actually solve it by using the distributive properties and combining like terms on the same side of the equation. So this leads us to here. When solving multi-step linear equations, what should you always do first? The first thing that you should always do is you should always distribute. And what the distributive property allows us to do is it allows us to rewrite that equation without the parentheses, so that we can work with all items on an even playing field. They aren't trapped inside of parentheses, making them more difficult to work with. After we've distributed, the second thing that we're going to do, since the parentheses are now gone, is we're going to combine like terms that are on the same side of the equation. If they're on opposite sides of the equation, then we have to use our undoing rules. But if they are on the same side of the equation, we can combine them like terms. So moving forward, these are the first two things you always want to do when you're solving a multi-step linear equation. You should always distribute and then always combine like terms that are on the same side of the equation. So here we're going to now do a couple of additional examples. So the first thing I see is a number of subtractions. So in order to prevent myself from making any errors, I'm going to walk through and change those all using keep, change, change. Then from here, I know that my first step is always to get rid of those parentheses, and I'm going to do that by utilizing the distributive property. So here I have negative 2/5 times 10x plus negative 2/5 times a negative 15 plus that negative 6 is still there is equal to negative 4. Now I'm going to do some math off to the side to allow me to solve my fractions. So I have negative 2/5 times 10 over 1, which then becomes negative 20 over 5, which becomes negative 4. So here we know that that negative 2/5 times 10x is really negative 4x. Then the second math problem I'm going to solve off to the side is negative 2/5 times negative 15 over 1. Negative times a negative is a positive, so I have positive 30 over 5, which is 6. So that then tells me that it's negative 4x plus 6 plus a negative 6 is equal to negative 4. So I start off by utilizing the distributive property to get rid of the parentheses inside of my equation. Then from here, I start looking for terms that are alike on the same side of the equation. So I'm going to start here and look at that part that I've highlighted in blue. And what I notice is that I have two terms that are alike because they do not contain any variables, the positive 6 and the plus negative 6. So those I can actually combine together to become negative 4x plus 0, which is then really just negative 4x on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I only have that negative 4, and so it just stays by itself, and I don't change it. Then from here, this equation is actually down to one step. I notice that I'm multiplying the negative 4 and the x together, so I can undo that by dividing both sides by a negative 4, which results in x is equal to 1. And so as a result, now at this point, I could take x equals 1, plug it back into that original equation, test it out, and I would find that that value is in fact the value that makes the equation true. But this equation was much easier to solve when I utilized the distributive property first and then combined those like terms on the same side of the equation second. That set me up for success as I got down here to my final step. All right, final example for this particular video. So here I can see I have a set of parentheses. I can also see that I have some subtractions. I'm going to change those utilizing keep, change, change before I start. This one becomes plus a negative 1. And as a result, I think I'm now good to go. So I'm going to start by rewriting this equation without parentheses by distributing out this negative 1 here. So I have 20 plus a negative 1/2 x plus negative 1 times negative 4 is 4 is equal to 10. So I start off by distributing out that negative 1. Then from here, I combined any like terms on the same side of the equation. On the left-hand side, I see that I have 20 and 4, and those can be combined to be 24 plus negative 1/2 x is equal to 10. And then from here, I'm going to undo the order of operations that are happening to x next. So from here I can notice that I have a multiplication of x by negative 1/2 and an addition of 24. The multiplication of negative 1/2 would come first, and then the addition of 24. So I'm going to undo those operations in reverse. So I'm going to start by undoing the plus 24 by adding a negative 24 to each side. So then here I'm left with negative 1/2 x is equal to negative 14. I'm then going to divide both sides by a negative 1/2 to undo that multiplication of negative 1/2. So I have x is equal to negative 14 divided by negative 1/2, which then if I utilize keep, switch, flip, I have negative 14 times negative 2/1, so then I turn them both into fractions, and I find x is equal to negative times a negative is a positive 28/1, or just 28.